Hey there, YouTube. Leo Alderpold. Just driving back from seeing a client. As you guys will know, I was desk bound for a lot of the last few weeks or whatever, catching up with work in the office or at my kitchen table. Well, I had to go out and give some advice to somebody this morning, and as I was coming back, I figured I'd stop here and make a little video about something I've been meaning to for a while. Housekeeping, first of all. I'm smoking in my Twain some Solani aged barley flake. Great stuff. Real favourite of mine at the moment. Now, the forest I'm actually sitting in, or the woodland I'm actually sitting in, is historically, in the context of woodland management and forest management in this country, a very important woodland. For a couple of reasons, but I'll get to that in a moment. I think what I wanted to run through first is a sort of potted history of the forests and woodlands of this country. So going back to the end of the last ice age, majority of this country was forest, one big forest. If I remember rightly, and I'm going to have to look this up to confirm, but I have a feeling the name of the forest at the time was Endor, which I guess all of you Star Wars fans will be very familiar with the name of, but I guess that's where they stole the name from. The forest which originally covered most of the south of England. Well, what is now England. So the ice caps melted. The land bridge between ourselves here in Britain and Europe essentially was swamped and became what's now the English Channel and the North Sea. And we became cut off from the rest of Europe. So we developed a very particular kind of forest here. Hazel would have figured in there a lot, so would oak, ash, field maple, things like that. And then we began to get colonized, of course. Incidentally, this is not a video for creationists who think the world is only 6,000 years old, because I'm going back quite a few thousand years before that. So we had successive waves of various peoples coming into this country, and obviously with the more of with migration and with settlement, the forests became smaller as they were used and converted, especially after our discovery of agriculture. But of course at that time they were a resource that everybody used. And then after the Norman invasion, what essentially happened was the first carving up of the British Isles. So woodlands, like, well, what would have been on this ground that I'm sitting on at the moment, suddenly became the exclusive province of wealthy people, friends of the Normans, and so on. And ordinary common people couldn't come here. In actual fact, the word forest, in the context that it has been historically used in this country, actually refers to a hunting ground. It doesn't necessarily infer trees at all. But in any case, pretty much since the Norman invasion, one way or another, the woodlands of this country have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. Um, and we're now actually at about 12% forest cover in this country, which is the most we've had pretty much since then. Now, the history of woodlands in this country, and the history of forests, is very much the history of war. Because what happened is we've depleted pretty much all of our virgin, if you like, natural oak forest. The last of that was certainly cut down during the Napoleonic Wars to build ships and things like that, and to fuel the war effort. So we've had this constant fluctuation of woodland. We don't have wilderness in this video, in this country, as I explained in a previous video when I was doing my VR to Joshua in the woods. But we don't have any woodlands in this country that can be classified as wilderness, unless you're talking about a woodland that's on the escarpment of a cliff that's completely inaccessible by man. You could, I suppose, classify that as a wilderness, but it's not exactly something you can walk out into and go and camp or anything like that. The majority of our woodlands and forests in this country look pretty much like this. And actually, this woodland that I'm sitting in right here is the first woodland to have been planted by the Forestry Commission. Now, the Forestry Commission was set up in this country after World War I to stabilise and guarantee a source of timber in the event that we had another war. So I'm actually sitting in a mixture of Douglas fir and Norway spruce here. This is, as you can probably see by the size of the trees, it's not that old. But actually, right where I'm sitting is where the first trees ever planted by the Forestry Commission would have been planted, and they were Douglas fir as well. This area is called Eggersford Forest, and it grows some of the best Douglas fir in the country. So, to bring you up to date, forests in this country are little more than a resource, nothing more. It's very rare that you find a woodland that has had minimal impact by people, and that's isolated enough from people as well. All woodlands in this country are very, very fragmented, very, very small. You're talking no more than a few miles across at the absolute outside. And forests like this one, which is effectively under public ownership, although I use that word with a little tongue-in-cheek. You can come here and you can walk your dog and, you know, take the kids out and something like that, but you can't camp here or anything like that. This is a tree farm, and that's pretty much what a great majority really of our woodlands in this country consist of. Softwoods like this that are planted on a short rotation, so they're planted maybe at you know, year 14, 15, something like that. They'll be thinned out. They're all planted in straight lines, so a machine can drive up and down this bank that I'm on in a nice straight line and take out the trees in the matrix. They'll cut a rack through that a machine can get through, and then the machine will reach in, take out trees from the matrix of what we call the cant. And then a few years later after that, it will be thinned again, until maybe it reaches 40, 50, 60 years old, depending on the species that's been planted and the location that it's planted in, the soil type and the yield class of the timber. And then it will all be cut down and the whole thing will start again. So this is a tree farm with about a 50-year rotation, something like that. See, I see a woodland like this is barren, really. Now, I'm not going to pick up the camera and try and move it around, actually, because it took me a little while to set up where it's standing at the moment in some brush. But the ground that I'm sitting on, the only flora in the ground that I'm sitting on consists of about 3 things. That's bramble, there's ivy on the ground, and there's a bit of bracken. That's pretty much about it. From a biodiversity point of view, it's pretty shit. Now, of course, woodlands like this have got their place, you know. For a lot of people, they're for people like me, they're a source of income. But we've got no culture in this country of sympathetic forest management. You know, when you look at people like the Germans, the Austrians, Scandinavia, they've got a very, very long and rich history of forest management, and they know how to do it well over there. I grew up in the forests of Germany, and I loved it. But they were the first to practice what is called continuous cover forestry, which is a bit of a break away from the system that I just talked about of cutting all of these trees down after about 60 years and replanting them all again. Continuous cover forestry is a whole ball game in itself, but it pretty much explains. The title explains what it is. It's about keeping tree cover, like I'm sitting under, always on that location, and that's a little bit more of a labour-intensive process, and it requires better education as to the biology of forest management. And the Germans have been doing it for centuries. So it's a bit of a shame, really, that we found ourselves in a position where we think of forests as nothing more than a resource for effectively what's biomass now. It mostly gets chipped and burnt. Of course, it's not the case in all woodlands in this country. We've got a lot of very rich and diverse woodlands, but they're very fragmented, and they're not. They're sadly not the norm. So when I think about Henry David Thoreau, who wrote the very famous line, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," he didn't do it here. So there you go. I'm running up to 14 minutes. That's a bit of a potted history. I think I'll probably do another video elaborating on this a little more. But I wanted to take a little time to do a quick video for you and tell you a little bit about many of the places where I work over here. Less talking, more smoking. See you later, folks.